today, His Majesty the King, King Charles, did something that, of course, our late and wonderful monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, truly would never have done. Different time, different generation, and of course now a brand new reign. But it shocked quite a few people and made sure, of course, that it got all the headlines that His Majesty the King was truly looking for. That's right, His Majesty the King, King Charles III, was back at work for the very first time in quite a long period. Back, of course, to make sure that people understood exactly where he is with his own personal cancer health journey. And it was a spectacular success. Let me tell you, there were a lot of people out to greet His Majesty the King, but more importantly than that, he really did do something rather groundbreaking. In fact, somebody might say that this could have been his Princess Diana moment. Let me explain. Great anticipation at the University College Hospital here in the very heart of London. The very first time we were going to actually be able to see His Majesty the King more up close and personal than before. So how did he look? Well, alongside Queen Camilla, it has to be said, who looked a little bit cautious and a little bit worried, but then she has, and rightly so, had a lot to be worried about herself. The bigger problem though, really, you see, is that His Majesty the King obviously wants to get back out there, and this is the problem. We knew about his diagnosis in January, and more importantly, you know, he's always tried to become a visible king, popping up, of course, at services at church and things like that. This was, some might suggest, his very first big comeback. How did he look? Well, what I can tell you is this: he looked in fine fettle. Clearly has lost quite a bit of weight, and some people are suggesting that he looked a little bit pale. But I don't know about you, for a man of his age and going through what he's going through, to simply get back out there and meet, of course, the public, did a lot for his spirits. And let me tell you, a lot for ours. A lot of people were very moved to see King Charles back out there. Now, what was really fascinating, I found, was this: the way that he took the flowers, which were very nicely given to him from a rather young, delightful lady. He really looked thrilled to receive them, and uncharacteristically was waving them in the air as he was leaving. You never really would have got Her Majesty the Queen to sort of break that fourth wall. But what was the bigger thing that really got everybody talking? Well, it was simply this. We all know, don't we, about how the late and beautiful Princess Diana, some might suggest, really cornered this market in the touchy-feely royal world. She was the very first person, of course, to hold hands with an AIDS patient, an HIV patient, shocking the world. Now, some might suggest, of course, that His Majesty the King has taken that on board many years later. He is a totally different king to, of course, Queen Elizabeth, who was, well, we should say, rather reserved at points. And I don't mean that unkindly. It was a different time and, of course, a different moment. But what we saw today was His Majesty the King holding hands with patients, being very kind, listening to their stories, and they were clearly visibly moved. But what did we find out about His Majesty's health scare so far? Well, what we can tell you is this, that His Majesty the King will be having, as we're speaking now, his own treatment later on this afternoon here in London. But he wanted to go and see people himself to reassure people, in fact, that cancer really isn't the end game that he's painted out to be. Yes, some people might say it's very easy. There you are, very wealthy, powerful, all of that sort of stuff. It isn't about that. That's what he said. It's about your own personal journey. Do what you feel you can do. Highlight things. Let people know how you're feeling. And more importantly, if you can, get out there and live life to the full. He's certainly doing that, but as I say, Queen Camilla by his side was very concerned all the time, because they're very aware that they don't want His Majesty the King to overdo it. He's still very keen to get out there full time and take on a full royal diary. That's simply not going to be the case for some time. Lovely moment where you see His Majesty the King wearing what some people are now suggesting a very special tie. For a lot of royal watchers, you will know, of course, that King Charles, Prince Charles, was very staid in the way that he dressed. But over the last couple of years, he's decided to jazz up that wardrobe a little bit and send out personal messages with the clothing that he's wearing. So take a note of this tie. This is a dinosaur tie. Oh, that's right. And the reason why he's wearing this tie, we've been told, is that it was a gift from one of his grandchildren. We surmise in that this could be Prince George. And this is a message back to Prince George to basically say, don't worry, all is fine. I'm in the dinosaur tie. Now, that might seem nothing, but for anybody going through this terrible disease right now, sending positive messages back is the very best way. As I say, His Majesty the King really was in fine fettle and very keen to prove that his agility and the fact that he was able to laugh with a lot of the staff and patients and enjoy himself on many different ways. We did too, but I think what a lot of people don't realise is it's very straining to go through that when you are literally still undergoing treatment. Let's not forget that King Charles is still going through that personal journey himself. But by becoming a brand new patron of this particular charity, well, clearly that meant a lot to him, and more importantly, did a world of good for the patients. What Charles is hoping to do is this. During the visit, it was announced that His Majesty the King will now become a brand new patron of course, Cancer Research UK. And this is really pivotal. I think what we can learn from this, and this is not being schmaltzy, but what you really find is that it's absolutely affected him, as it does everybody. And what he was trying to communicate today was the fact that, he wanted to know about the treatments, the technology, what other people are going through, because as he said, it can make you incredibly insular. People shut you off, want to cosset you, and really all you want to do is carry on living life. Yes, it's a bit of a hindrance, but don't let that rule your life. And I think what we found out about His Majesty the King was, as I said at the start of this particular report, when you look back now and you think about Her Majesty the Queen, yes, she would have been empathetic and kind and very sincere, but clearly she wasn't the sort of person, even with a white glove, that was going to reach out and take a patient's hand. It wasn't her sort of time, as it were. She came from a totally different time where you kept your distance and respectful. King Charles knows, of course, that by talking, touching, laughing and chatting with other patients, it breaks down barriers and makes it more acceptable. If he can get through this, if he can go through a morning meeting other people, perhaps other people may do the same thing. Finally, I've been told that His Majesty the King, alongside Queen Camilla, will be making some private visits back to this particular hospital and other hospitals in the future. They simply want to keep up the good work that so many of these wonderful people are doing to try and combat this terrible disease. Neil Sean in the very heart of London.